From KPRC 2, this is Houston Newsmakers with Cambrell Marshall.
Good morning and welcome to Houston Newsmakers as we talk about the potentially bombshell polling information that shows Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo in a statistical dead heat as she runs for re-election. That information from the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston. Dr. Mark Jones is a fellow in political science at the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University, and he joins me this morning for a deep dive into some of these this polling information that you come up with. First of all, Dr. Jones, explains to me how someone who is a political science fellow at Rice University is a part of a project that's coming out of the University of Houston. That sounds like a kumbaya moment.
Yeah, well, we have a great working relationship between the Baker Institute and the Hobby School for more than a decade. Beth Robertson, who sits on both boards, has really helped us along with that. And we all believe, in both at the Hobby School and the Baker Institute, that we're better together and we can produce better quality research to help the entire community, both here in Houston as well as statewide.
So let's talk about some of the results here. The big takeaway, as I mentioned earlier, is that you say that there basically is a statistical dead heat with Democrat Lina Hidalgo over Republican challenger Alexandra Del Moral Miller at, did I pronounce it right? At 48 to 47%. That's well within any margin of error that I've been associated with. So would that be the case here as well, that it's almost like a toss-up?
It is. Right now, the best way to interpret the data is that the two candidates are tied.
And how do you arrive at that information?
Well, we did a survey of Harris County residents and asked them about their vote intention. We know that there's a sort of built-in error in the survey. And when you get to results that close, that is, for instance, Hidalgo's up by 1% with likely voters, but if we go to the most likely voters, it flips and Del Moral Mueller's up by a little bit. When you get results like that, the best thing you can say is that it's too close to call, and either candidate has a chance of victory in November, and actually a pretty good chance.
So it seems to me rather contradictory in one sense, that we live in this community that is considered the most diverse, one of the most diverse in the United States of America, yet when we talk about the voters, that there seem to be distinct and sharp differences among voters along racial lines, for example, as opposed, white voters as opposed to black and Latino voters.
Right. So what we have with white voters is by a 2-to-1 margin, they support Del Moral Mueller, whereas among black voters, by about a 5-to-1 margin, they support Hidalgo. Latino voters are pretty much split down the middle, with Del Moral Mueller having a slight advantage, although once you put in the margin of error, it's pretty much a tie there.
So as you break down some of the issues, and by the way, I suggest anybody who has not gone to this, I'm going to put it on the Newsmakers website. You need to go and do a deep dive for yourself. I really enjoyed getting the information about this. As you break down the issues, there are a lot of the highest issues of concern for the voters. Two of them are crime and public safety at 78%, followed by government corruption at 72%, then several other issues. We talked about this earlier. Republicans have long claimed to be the party of law and order, and so it sounds like that sort of thing would be in their favor when you see results like that with the crime and public safety at 78%.
Definitely on crime and public safety, that's the good issue for Republicans. It's an issue that's concerning a large proportion of Harris County voters. They believe there are serious crime problems, and the Republican message is essentially more convincing, particularly when it's contrasted with Lina Hidalgo's message and that of more progressive Democrats. I think it would be different if we were talking about a Democrat in the mold of a John Whitmire, but that's not who's running for county judge. So
in this case, what stands out? Was your polling able to get that? And I know that Republicans, observation of mine, Republicans have really been much better at shaping the discourse, shaping the narrative than Democrats. By the way, Democrats hate it when I say that, but I'm a hardcore independent. I don't really care. So, but that's what I seem to see, and it seems that may be in Republicans' favor if that works like that in Harris County.
Right. So you could agree or disagree that Harris County has a crime problem, and you could agree or disagree that Harris County has a government corruption problem. But the reality is that a large majority of likely voters believe it has a crime problem and believe it has a governmental corruption problem. And those are two issues that work very much against Lina Hidalgo and help Alexandra Del Moral Miller. And they're one of the reasons why Hidalgo's only up by 1 point over Del Moral Mueller, while Beto O'Rourke in Harris County is up by 9 points.
So I'm guessing that political strategists on both sides of this thing are really looking at this information and trying to mine it for all it's worth as they shape their narrative as they go down toward the November election, correct?
That's correct. And I think particularly they'll be trying to, what the survey shows is people's positions on Hidalgo are pretty hardened in. Only about 1 in 10 Harris County voters doesn't have an opinion of Lina Hidalgo, but half of them don't have a solid opinion about Alex Del Moral Mueller, meaning that that's probably where the campaign in many ways is going to be decided. Can Del Moral Mueller educate those voters in a way that they have a positive opinion of her when November 8 comes around? Or can the Hidalgo camp go negative and essentially erode people's understanding or beliefs or perception of Del Moral Mueller so they have a more negative opinion of her on November 8? Well,
your polls clearly show that Lina Hidalgo is by far the best known of elected officials in Harris County, but in this case, it's not helping her. So that seems to indicate that there may be higher negatives?
Yes, and we've seen that. We've been tracking. The Hobby School's been doing these polls for quite some time. And what we've seen with Lina Hidalgo is that her disapprovals or her negatives have been slowly but surely rising up to a point now where they're almost equal with her favorability rate. So she's pretty much a very slight net positive. And actually, if you compare her to other candidates, her net favorability rating is lower than that Del Moral Mueller, as well as lower than that than, say, Sheriff Ed Gonzalez.
So you study this on a regular basis. How is this trending this way? Why is it? Has anything to do with the way that the state Republican Party has really taken aim at Harris County in a lot of different ways? Is that a part of why that may be trending that direction?
Well, that's part of the weakness of Hidalgo is that she's seen as weak on crime and essentially corrupt, at least by some of the voters. And that's part of a narrative that's been fueled by statewide Republicans. Also hurting Hidalgo is the fact that she has really never adopted a moderate position. She's pretty much stuck to her progressive guns and hasn't shifted towards the center, say like a Kim Ogg or a John Whitmire, someone who tries to appeal to moderates. Hidalgo has really never tried to appeal to them. And then so that hurts her just among local voters. And then if you throw in the Biden administration's extremely low approval ratings and record inflation for the past 40 years, all of that combines to make it a difficult election for Lina Hidalgo unless she can essentially bring Alex Del Moral Mueller's negatives up or her own positives up. And it's going to be easier, I think, for Hidalgo to attack Del Moral Mueller than to raise her own positive favorability ratings. So
I'm going to talk about the state results that you have in a second, but is there any skewing at all in this survey that may paint a biased picture at all, the chance for that? Hear me out on this. The poll indicates that the whites make up 40% of the survey compared to 31% for Latinos and 21% for blacks. Well, blacks are much more likely to vote for Hidalgo. So does that kind of change the skewing of it, perhaps, or not?
No, I mean, because that's pretty reflective of what we expect the likely voter population to be. If anything, the poll may be slightly overstating the proportion of Latinos who are going to turn out to vote, but that's not going to affect the candidates in that they're pretty much evenly split there. And I think one of the difficulties, though, in what this poll highlights is the importance for Democrats, if they're going to win in Harris County, of really ramping up African-American turnout in November, because right now, that's a key electorate for them in terms of winning the county judge position. I think Carol Robinson made that message at the Democratic Party that it's important for the Democratic Party to really take that into account, especially in an election year where we don't have a single African-American running for any of the statewide judicial races or for high-level positions like county judge.
So it may be challenging to get them out there, but they know what their job is ahead of them. You also did a statewide survey. Let's talk about the results concerning Governor Greg Abbott and his race against Beto O'Rourke. First, how Harris County's numbers shaped up and how the rest of the state shaped up.
Well, in Harris County, Beto has an advantage of 9 points over Abbott compared to Hidalgo's 1 point advantage. And statewide, though, it flips around. Abbott has a 5 point advantage over Beto. And that's similar if we go down to lieutenant governor or the attorney general's race. So right now, the natural Republican advantage in Texas is about a 10 or a 9, and Beto has been able to have that to 5. although we haven't had any surveys, neither ours nor others, that have shown Beto getting any closer than about 5 or 6%. So that's going to be, for him, the real trick and the real difficult thing to do is going to be closing that gap between 5 and 6% and flipping it to at least a 1-point advantage.
And your poll has been very accurate in terms of predicting those numbers. I remember for the previous election, the president, you guys were right on, pretty close, within like even less than 0.5%. The challenge of trying to close that gap between now and then seems kind of challenging, does it not, for Beto O'Rourke?
It's going to be tough, especially with a Biden White House and a national climate that's not doing Texas Democrats any favors. But when you throw in effectively Greg Abbott's ability to saturate the television airwaves as well as digital with as many ads as he needs to simultaneously attack Beto O'Rourke and tie him to unpopular national Democrats, it's going to be a tough challenge. But I think what the poll's showing is that it's not an insurmountable challenge. That is, it's not like 10 points or 12 points where there's no hope whatsoever. And we've seen the Republicans have had some weaknesses. The Uvalde massacre is a weakness for Abbott, and it's hurt him, especially among Latinas. We found that that's an area where the Uvalde massacre is really, at least, is linked to a lower level of support for Abbott among Latinas. It helped among Latinos, but among Latinas, female Latinos, it is not. And then also the Dobbs decision somewhat works against Republicans in that while most Republicans are okay with the trigger law, it's pretty much that bans abortion except if the mother's life is at risk, it still is seen as a little too extreme for the average Texas voter. So there's a little room there for Democrats if they play their cards right, although they generally have been pretty poor in terms of messaging on the issue of abortion over the past decade.
Republicans have been in statewide office here for generations, it seems. According to your poll, is there any look down the road? It looked like that anything like that might be changing, or it looks like it's status quo going forward for Republicans?
I think when we're looking at November right now, the most likely scenario is that Republicans once again sweep statewide, extending their winning streak that dates all the way back to 1996, when Republicans haven't lost a single statewide election since then. But if you look at the governor's race, I wouldn't completely count Beto O'Rourke out, and I wouldn't completely count out Rochelle Mercedes Garza against Attorney General Ken Paxton. Although for her to have much hope, she really needs to do a much better job fundraising. Right now, she's just not raising enough money to educate voters about the Attorney General and his weaknesses. And if voters go to the polls and vote simply on the partisan lines in November, Garza will lose to Paxton. She needs a significant number of Republicans who vote for Greg Abbott, vote for Dan Patrick, vote for Glenn Hager as controller, to vote for her instead of Ken Paxton as Attorney General.
Dr. Mark Jones, thank you so much for the insight. We always appreciate it. Look forward to having more conversations as we get closer to November. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just ahead, the challenges of dealing with the mental health within the criminal justice system. Former Harris County DA Devin Anderson leading an effort to change that. She joins me next.